Hello again. This is the third part of the online lecture for week 7 of essential reporting. The first two parts of this lecture were all about the assignments. So remind you about the news writing test, which is assignment 1, and the second assignment, which is the critical analysis of a news story and filling out a brief log. So make sure you've understood what it is you're required to do for the assignments. Let's continue now to look at what we mean by converged newsrooms. This was a big issue over the last 20 years within the media industry as new technologies arrived, and suddenly we were moving from being monomedia newsroom, so a dedicated print newsroom or dedicated newspaper or magazine, or even just dedicated online, and starting to converge these technologies so that one newsroom was publishing in a whole range of different ways. Just like you to have a think about these things. Have a think about this question and then pause while you just note down your answers to it. So I'd like you to think about where you found out about what was in the news this week. Just have a think about this past week. An awful lot has been going on in the news. Ask yourself, where did you find out about that first? Did you read it in a newspaper? Did you see it on television? Did you hear it on radio? Did you see it on a website? Or did you see it on social media? So if you press pause now, have a think about that. Ask yourself about the big stories that have taken place this week, and think about where you first saw them. I'll see you in a moment when you press play again. Okay, hopefully you've had a think about that. I'd like to do the same thing now about advertising. So where did you see advertising? Where did people try to sell you things? Did you see it in a newspaper or a magazine? Did you see advertising on television? Did you hear advertising on radio? Did you see it on a website? Or did you hear it through social media? And think about not only where you saw it, but what was effective. Which adverts got your attention, and which adverts maybe led to you either changing your behavior or buying something. So again, press pause, have a think about that. Just consider where it is that you saw an effective advert. Okay, so hopefully you'll have done those two things, thought about those questions. I don't know what your answer is, but I'm going to guess it wasn't a newspaper where you saw a news story, and it wasn't a newspaper where you saw an effective advert. The chances are you're probably thinking you saw nearly all of this on your phone, whether through a mobile website or through social media, and that in itself illustrates exactly what's been going on. Is that news audiences have been moving away from traditional media like print, but also away from scheduled TV and scheduled radio, and it's been moving much more towards online and to social. So for a vast number of people now, their phone is the main source of information, but it's also the main source of advertising in their lives. So you can see what's been going on. When I was your age, newspapers, TV and radio was certainly the predominant forms. So let's think about print. What's been driving this this move towards digital? Well, that graph sort of tells you everything you need to know about print circulations. I know you are aware that print circulations are declining, but maybe you're not aware of quite how dramatically things have declined. So you have mass circulation print titles like The Sun, up around 4 million or more. The Daily Mirror, you can see, back in the 1960s was 5 million or more, but now both of those titles have now come way down, and you can see that the projections into the next during this decade are for them to really fade away. Now those straight lines don't actually reflect reality. They aren't going to fade away in quite that dramatic form, but you can see how much their circulations have declined. And of course with print, that means that they're not getting money from people buying their products, so cover price, which generates quite a lot of money, but also it means that advertisers are not willing to pay as much money to put their adverts into those print products. So that has undermined and radically changed the business model of the media in the UK, because newspapers were no longer, from about the turn of the millennium, from about 2000, were no longer generating the vast amounts of cash that they used to generate. And this is a story from last year now on Hold the Front Page. It's a really interesting website. I'd recommend that you take a look at it on a regular basis. It tells you a lot about the media industry, certainly the regional media industry. And I just look at that headline: print circulation is down 20% for some titles, and that was within a 6-month period. It dropped for some titles, some regional titles, things like the Leicester Mercury and Nottingham Post, were going down by about 20% over a 6-month period. That's massive declines, and obviously unsustainable. But not only is it bad to lose audience, but it means you're losing revenue. You're not generating money, and money is what we use to pay journalists to actually do the job. Meanwhile, what you also undoubtedly know already is the rise of digital forms of access to news information. So this is some figures from the Office of National Statistics, the ONS. So figures from this year, but it shows now, in relatively short space of time, over the last 13 years or so, it's gone from a minority of people accessing their news digitally, down 20%. Now it's up at around 70% of people access their news digitally, and I'm guessing you and I are among that 70% who either rarely or never look at print products. And there you go, same publication, Hold the Front Page, reporting on the massive increases for digital audiences across all of those newspapers, which were in print down up to 20%, but with digital audiences rising massively. And that causes a problem, because it's harder to make money out of a digital audience than it is out of a print audience, because digital audiences, they don't buy your product, as we all know. We just get it for free. And we can also skip things. We can have ad blockers on our devices, and we can skip over adverts much more quickly. We're much more fickle, and we spend less time looking at stories, whereas with a newspaper, advertisers would pay a lot of money to take out an advert in there. So it changes the business model. And again, this is about money. And don't be afraid to admit this. It has to be about money, because if we want to be professional journalists, the money has to come from somewhere. It relies on there being a healthy business model in order for us to be able to make a living out of this. So about 20 years ago, we could see these declining circulations in print, and we could see the money disappearing and the advertising disappearing. So we developed basically a vision of the future, where we no longer thought about the format. So no longer would I be a print journalist, that I would be a news journalist, for instance. So I would be thinking about the function of what I did to tell news stories, rather than the format in which I was telling those stories, i.e. print. So I would start to say, well, I tell stories, but it means I can tell stories in any way, shape or form that I want. So I start thinking about what's the content of what I'm reporting, not what platform am I reporting on. Now that sort of sounds obvious nowadays, but 20 years ago that wasn't so obvious. People would see themselves as a newspaper journalist, or as a TV reporter, or as a radio reporter, whereas now the intelligent way to approach it is to say, well, no, I'm a news reporter, I'm a political reporter, I'm a sports reporter, I'm a health reporter, and I will tell my story in every different way that's available to me. And the aim of this was to provide growth. We could see that that graph of print circulation certainly was heading downwards very fast, and we needed to find a way of helping to grow our industry. And the good news is that it's worked, that there is a growing demand for news. You can't move for news providers now, can you? We needed to grow usable audiences. The danger of our initial approach to online was that we would just grow audiences, but we didn't engage with those audiences sufficiently. So we didn't find out about them. We weren't able to use them to help generate money. We recognised there was a growing range of technologies available to us. Back in the old days, we would just have a typewriter and that would be pretty much it. But as time has gone by, we've now got a whole range of technologies, which makes our job much more interesting, much more fun. And we are able now to speak to our audiences in a way that we never could before. We would write the story, put it in a newspaper, and maybe we'd look at the letters page a day or two later to see what people thought. Now we have that social media engagement with our audiences. And the other great thing about convergence, this move towards kind of multiple platforms, multiple technologies, is it allows all of us to innovate, to do new things. It's not just the same old tradition that the person who's retiring from a newsroom was doing the same thing as the person who had just arrived. You can do a whole load of new things. So really see this as a positive movement. The other good news is that it has created new opportunities for our business, the media industry, to actually generate money. But it has changed the way that we have to go around making money. So that's the converged newsroom, just some of the basics behind why things have changed over the last 20 years or so, and to create this world of convergence, where certainly print, online, and social media are now all intimately interconnected, and it's key that you, as a journalist, understand the relationship between print, online, and social, and your role to use all three of these effectively in order to be an effective journalist, which is why the second assignment is asking you to take a particular story by a particular publisher and say, okay, look at that. How did they do it in print? How did they do it online? How did they do it in social? Because that's what you need to be thinking about doing. How do you engage with a particular audience? How do you get their interest? How do you use the strengths of particular platforms to provide relevant material? Clearly, a video is useless in a newspaper, but it's really useful on in social and online. So, how do you use the appropriate platform, and then how do you engage with that audience? How do you communicate with that audience so that you're keeping their interest? So I'm going to end this video at this point and move on to the fourth and final part of this week's online lecture, in which I'm going to talk just a little bit about my own experience when I was at the Manchester Evening News and leading the convergence project there, to just give you an example of how things changed there. So I'll see you in a moment when we'll talk about the Manchester Evening News.